Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of IGEL Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got a really important topic today for people who run Linux-based endpoints, specifically in this case, IGEL. And it is not super exciting and sexy, but it is very practical and very appropriate, and that is how to print. How to print natively, how to print through a remote protocol like ICA or RDP or Blast. That kind of stuff is something that you may think of, old school and legacy, but you'll run into it in every project, in every implementation somewhere pretty quick along the way. So with us, we have Chris Feeney, who's the local sales engineer. Chris, how's it going?
It's going great, Andy. Always a pleasure to get this thing off and running again.
What's the most exciting thing that's happened in your work world in the last 7 days?
We got through company kickoff, so actually getting the real work done for the year. That's getting through that. So
now your customer and partner kickoff's coming up at the end of February?
Yeah, now we're kind of gearing up for that. So it's sort of like gear up for the company kickoff. And usually, in the old days, it was between then and there you had Citrix Summit and other kickoffs, and so then now we get through that. Then you've got another couple weeks before Disrupt. And so there's another ramp up, and then we'll be into March at that point. But there's a lot of exciting things out there, as you could probably see in the announcements, and so there's a lot of that going on too, which is great.
Yeah, it's interesting. We always blame lackluster sales in January on conferences, and this year there really aren't any conferences. So I think what it's proving is that the reality of lackluster sales in the beginning of the year is related to the hangover from the year before, and customers and companies getting their budgets together and getting things going, and then by February things start rolling again.
Yeah, kind of getting everybody geared up with the tools, the messaging, and all rah, get them fired up, inspired, and then hit the ground running. So.
Yeah. So we're lucky enough. This is every other week we do the IGEL community-based blogs, and then the corporate IGEL blogs the other week. And we're lucky enough to have Seb with us again. Seb, how's it going over in Germany?
Quite fun, I would say. It's snowy outside. It's pretty cold, more than the years before. And since the Disrupt isn't happening on site like the years before, my lever is feeling pretty fine at the moment, more than the years before, to be honest. So the amazing time for me was to see how the Raspberry Pi topic last week for main computing was announced and used by some community members. That's something that is pretty amazing, I must say. That's one of the biggest changes in the company since years from my side.
Yeah, let's review that quickly, and maybe if I ask you, what the most exciting thing that's happened maybe in the last week or so is that, have you been able to play with the Raspberry Pi? Are you experiencing it? How's it going?
I did. I was one of the lucky persons who had the chance to test it quite early and went through the different release candidates and beta phases. So until now, it's pretty stable. What I like is the housing, to be honest, even if there might be some lacking, like no GPI connectors or this kind of weird stuff. It's working pretty fine. And even from the temperature side, where I was expecting most of the issues in the Raspberry Pi can get pretty hot under power, it works pretty stable. So I'm really looking forward to deliver the getting started guide. So just for the audience, we will create a getting started guide like Doug already did for the UMS and IGEL OS, etc., who will help you to get that solution up and running as soon as possible.
So I was telling you guys before this, I went skiing out west last week. I think maybe we talked about it in the last podcast, and I'm now quarantining in a condo here local to my house. I can't go in the office where I have an IGEL Raspberry Pi waiting on me to get implemented as my primary production machine. So I'm looking forward to that if I can ever get out of quarantine here and back to the real world.
Yeah. On that note, Jeff Kalberg sent out an email internally. I guess there is also a firmware update. It was said, would you call it it's still sort of, I don't know if tech preview is the right phrase, but getting close to a GA version of firmware for the Raspberry Pi as we lead up to Disrupt on February 25th. Is that accurate?
It's absolutely right. And it's the first version where you don't see an RC or beta in the name. So it feels pretty good at the moment and pretty stable until now. I tested it since last week when Jeff sent it out to our internal users. Yeah, it's the first, I would say it's the first official release, which is not pushed to all the devices until now, but it will come, I guess, until end of the week, from what I understood.
And I want to say, I know this isn't the topic for today, but I want to say there's a secret ingredient for updating the device. Are we allowed to talk about that right now, or is that save it till later?
I would keep it for later. If you're speaking about the, let's say, new update process, let's keep it in a general manner, then I would keep it for us for the moment. But it might happen that we'll deliver some new pretty cool stuff.
We'll tease the audience with that one, but more to come on that topic.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if that's for all your firmwares or just that specific one, but we'll let that one rest for now and maybe have it as a topic in the coming weeks. All right, so again, I mentioned this earlier. We're talking about printing today, and we're specifically keying off the blog that I have on the screen here, guys. And the title of this is Mapping IGEL Local Printers to Citrix Session White Paper. I'm around Citrix all the time. I'm around IGEL all the time. I've run into this challenge within my own office because we use IGEL to do our own to run our own business. Before we go into this, and maybe the article does a little bit anyway, let's talk about just printing in general on the IGEL Linux operating system. Seb, you want to kind of give us a 101 when it comes to printing within Linux or within Ubuntu/IGEL?
Yes, with pleasure. From the first part of my answer would be, as soon as you can, please move your printers to a network printer solution, because even if you use it on a local device, it will work and it will be quite reliable. But if you have a network port already, so a print server installed on the printer, please do me a favor and port that printer to a print server, and the print server then on a corporate site on the real Windows or whatever print server where you can share the printer with other people. Because
let's do that real quick. I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. Let's start by saying what you were saying plus a little more. Look, if you're still in a corporate environment and you're managing local printers locally, you don't need to be doing that. That's not scalable. It's not manageable. If you're in a corporate environment, you need to be using some type of print server. I would say that the Microsoft solution for print serving is 20 years old or more and antiquated to some degree. They've got newer stuff, but not anywhere near where it could be. And then you could look at using something like Printer Logic for a printing service. All of those things are going to make what we talk about next so much more manageable and so much more realistic, right?
Absolutely. And since we have different kind of connectivities for the printers and different brands and different functions, if you want to use a duplex printer or a single page printer, or if you want to change some paper format, I mean, you can do a lot using that mapping function, but it has definitely some tweaks, and I wouldn't keep that configuration to a user. I want to get that kind of stuff centralized. And even if the UMS could do that easily, it's a lot of pressure for the administrator. So I would definitely go the route of the print server first.
So another thing to add to that topic is if you've got tons of different makes and models and manufacturers, that's a problem, right? So I tell people all the time when we start talking about printing in a EUC solution that includes IGEL or doesn't include IGEL, like, look, you got to get your printing shop in order. You can't have different types of makes and models everywhere. You can't have everybody with a printer on their desk. You can't have just key people. I'll tell you my story real quick. I worked for a large Fortune 500 company here in Charlotte at one point, and we're trying to roll out network printers. And I walk in my boss's office, and we're talking about people complaining about taking away their printer. I'm like, well, you got one on your desk. Why don't you get rid of that? And you could just see it in his face, like, well, yeah, this is for everybody else. This is not for me. I keep this printer on my desk. And like, well, you're the problem. It's the psychology of what you're doing by keeping the printer on your desk. That's the problem.
I agree 200%.
I think, and then in the age, looking back 20 years, right? In the years before, we all had some kind of tracking device on us for Fitbits and other things, right? I mean, it comes down to this, right? I mean, it's easier to just reach over, grab something off the local printer there, then get up, walk around the corner to the printing room or whatever, or I mean, is it really that we've kind of developed this thing around laziness? That's probably controversial, but I mean, it's human nature, right? I mean, but you're right. I mean, if you're in charge and you're enforcing a standard and yet you don't abide by that, you have your own local printer because you're special and everybody else is not. I mean, use the solution that you're asking everybody else to do. And if you don't like it, make some changes to it. So I probably stirred a pot on that one, but oh well.
Right.
I would also add one thing to the question. I mean, I don't know how it is in the US, but here in, let's say, in Central Europe, most of the printers are not really printers anymore. It's more kind of multifunctional stuff who's doing scanning, printing for the old-fashioned, also some fax function, scan to mail, scan to FTP, and whatever. And speaking about what we are speaking today, we're just speaking about the printing protocol, but you cannot do anymore something else. So you cannot think you will use it as a train scan or something like that. That's a different topic we might cover in an upcoming session. But that's where I'm seeing this multifunctional stuff coming to us. And we are, let's say, reducing the usage of the device on one topic with the printing function here.
Right.
Well, and that's interesting too, right? Because it's very, very unlikely that you find just a. Well, hold on. Let me do a 101 in printing that I learned from my Windows NT 4.0 instructor back in the late 90s. First of all, the printing solution is made up of two things. Number one is the print device, not the printer. Everybody calls it the printer. The thing that the paper comes out of is not the printer. That is the print device. It's the software that queues up the print job and turns it into something that can come out of the print device. That's the printer, and that's a software-defined queue. So I find people all the time that use the word printer and they mean that the device, and what they really mean is the print device. It's the software, and that's where we get into the conversation we just had now. That all these print devices have lots of multifunction capabilities. We have to have smart, manageable printers, the software and the queues, to be able to take advantage of that. If we don't, then we're just going to have a print device that can do 100 things and we can only get one thing out of it.
Good point.
One of my favorite tidbits from my NT4. I wish I could find that guy. He was awesome. I wish I could figure out who that guy was. He was a great resource. Okay, so Seb, let's talk about a printing solution within Ubuntu IGEL. Let's not talk about through Citrix or VMware or Microsoft at this point. Let's just talk about how you print through an IGEL solution natively. Anyway, I can tell you firsthand when I went to print through Citrix for the first time, Jeff Kalberg, which you mentioned a minute ago, Chris, he made me stop and print natively a PDF using the print queue just to prove that the printing was working in general. And then we got on to doing it through a remote protocol. So Seb, you want to walk us through how local printing works in general?
That's perfectly handleable, because I was asking, we're still speaking about Citrix, VMware, etc., but we are still having the possibility to print something locally, even if that doesn't make sense. From a printing testing function, it's pretty handy to open a Chromium or Firefox session to test if the Control-P function is working and if what you send to the printer is arriving there and in the right format. Besides that, you have the possibility, obviously, to use some command line functions, but yeah, if you're just in front of the device, sometimes it's just easier to open up the Firefox. So I will speak about the local side, where there it makes sense to use some specific driver definition and settings, because some people are also using IGEL OS as a local operating system, even if they're more the exception in our customer base. But some of them are just using also the local file printing service for emergency instruction that they are printing locally. And that's something that happens quite often in the healthcare sector, where if Citrix isn't available anymore, they're able to print something locally. And that's where it makes sense, in my opinion, to have a local printing solution implemented on the endpoint. But even there, we're speaking about mostly network printers. So you're more or less free to use whatever you want on the endpoint, from the USB serial adapter or power adapter in that case. Or just using a line printing protocol or raw protocol to access a printer through network.
So let's give people an example. It will become more and more common, especially now that you guys have the Chromium browser built into the operating system, for people to use a secure managed Linux operating system like IGEL to access SaaS applications through the web browser. And at that point, there is no remoting protocol, and you're basically doing native printing. My reference a while ago to what Kalberg told me to do is basically just have me go to any website, download a PDF, and print either one using the local print queue, but using the Linux driver for whatever print device I was working with, or using the line print device or the line print device, so LPD, right? That's the way it's often referred to. Using native, using the actual vendor driver, or using the built-in generic driver. That's really what you're talking about in that scenario, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And just a short hint, because I found out that in a customer project years before. I mean, it might already be known by our listeners, but a PPD file, so the driver definition file, it's not like on Windows, the file that you cannot open or just open with some tweaks. The PPD file is something you can open with every editor, and there you can change the configuration of the device you want to see. So if the device is supposed to do duplex printing, that's something usually you would do in the PPD file too. So just in case, if you have a PPD file, do not think that it's a closed, encrypted file or whatever. Or it's really a file that you can edit and tweak around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people don't recognize is that when you print, you're basically just taking something one app spit out and it's being converted into something that can be understood by the print device, and then out comes something on paper that in general, in theory, looks exactly like you expect it to, or close enough that you don't know the difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless you're printing checks or forms or something, and next thing you know, it's off by a centimeter and everything's screwed up. But that's a topic we might or might not get into here in a minute when we talk about universal print drivers.
Yeah.
Chris, I know we've been kind of dominating this. Before we jump into the Citrix world of printing for IGEL and the options that are laid out in this article, any comments or thoughts?
Yeah, I think certainly just getting sort of that foundation discussion going. But in the last year, we've obviously been dealing with a lot of the work from home scenario where you have users coming in, to a remote session like Citrix, which is the topic of the blog, et cetera, and the white paper. But how to get their printer at home, best practices around that, and that's really what this white paper is really all about. That home printer could be plugged in locally with a USB port, or it could be on the network or whatever. But just sort of setting the stage for now we're coming in from that unmanaged printer at home kind of situation. And then this white paper kind of covers here's your options with that.
So, Chris, I'm glad you brought that up because we've been talking, Seb and I've been talking as if we're talking on the corporate network and the LAN or the WAN, and we control some of this. And my comment a while ago around get your printing shop in order, don't have a bunch of different manufacturers and different models. Well, guess what? You can't do that when you start spreading that out over across a bunch of remote workers, which most of us have become in the last 12 months. And probably will remain at least hybrid remote workers. So that really leads into the article here and the options 1, 2, and 3 that Seb's going to walk us through that talks about how to make it kind of universally successful for remote users, right?
Correct. Yeah. And in Citrix specific, right? VMware may have its other versions of this, but the white paper is really specific to Citrix, just so we're all clear on that one.
And yes, VMware and Citrix and Microsoft will be different, but still similar, right? Nobody's reinvented the wheel anytime lately when it comes to printing. I
think that's right. I mean, you're really kind of the general best practices around how to handle, these situations. And so I do want to shout out. There was, collaboration from some IGEL folks that put this together. Just here in the States, Adam Woodcheck, Jason McCollum, Christian Bermudez, Chris Bates from different parts of the organization, and others too, certainly. But, as Doug Brown likes to say, I mean, sharing that knowledge really makes everybody better, and that's really the best part. And, what's great is just last week, we had an engineer reach out, was struggling to figure this out, and Seb basically said, hey, check this out. And, a couple hours later came back and said, perfect, this is exactly what I needed. I'm good now. So there's some great resources out there in the community. So let's roll our sleeves up and get into this.
Yeah. I had one other comment on this that now I've blanked on. I'll come back to it, I'm sure. So Seb, let's go with option 1, using Citrix Universal Print. Oh, here's what it was. Sorry. So Citrix and Microsoft are kind of the grandfathers of this, and they had some very, very basic solutions. If I go back 20 years ago or more, whenever I started my Citrix journey, we had to bring in companies like Tricera and others to solve these problems with third-party softwares. Kudos to Citrix and others, VMware and Microsoft, for adding some of those functionalities that the Triceras and the ThinPrints of the world, which are still very valuable products, but it used to be a huge gap between what they could solve for you. Citrix, as an example, has solved the print challenge for the most part. Every once in a while, I run into a customer who doesn't want to implement Citrix or implement more Citrix because they say printing is an issue, and I'm like, I don't know what planet you're living on. The printing has been more or less solved in one way or another for at least 10 years now. But I did want to give credit to some of the other players in the space that originally solved these problems for us at a cost to the customer, but solved these problems, and then Citrix and others have evolved to adopt some of the same concepts like the universal print driver and printing through some type of image technology. But Seb, let's talk number one, option one, using Citrix Universal Print Driver, UPD, which everybody calls, and it drives me nuts when technical folks use acronyms for things and never tell you what it actually means. I love that Seb a while ago said a line print device instead of LPD, because that gave me an opportunity to highlight what a line print device is often called, LPD. In this case, UPD, Citrix UPD. Seb, you want to walk us through option one?
Yeah, sure. And besides the fact that we have also a UD pocket, which then the UDP and then the UDP packages, it gets a little bit messy. So before starting with option one, just let me push one thing, because it's one of the most often happening issue I'm seeing in the community, but also my customer base. Before even starting about using a local printer mapped to Citrix, please disable the native USB redirection before starting to use a printer, because and that's the case in some customer situations, you enable the native USB redirection of Citrix or VMware, whatever. It might happen that the printer might be redirected if you misconfigure the native USB direction and then redirect into the Citrix session without having the usage of all the optimized channels we are using by using the mapping of printer. So just as a reminder, redirecting a printer is not best practice, even if there might be some use case. We are now speaking about the mapping of a local printer into VDI session. And please, before doing that, disable native USB direction. Sorry, Chris.
No, that's a great point. I mean, how many in the older days I remember managing some Citrix environments, how many servers were crashed because they was trying to load a USB device like a printer or whatever, and so definitely a great point on that one.
So what you guys are saying, going back to my conversation a while ago around the printer not being the print device, but being the software in the queue within the system, is historically been one of the dirtiest, worst written softwares on the computer. True?
Yeah, I agree.
It calls for many server reboots or blue screens.
And so in the world of multi-hosted server apps or server desktops, one bad print job can take down everybody on the server. Everybody's got to get off. Everybody's got to reboot. You can either move to VDI or you can use something that's been certified to not cause problems like the universal print driver.
Yeah, you just gave me nightmares thinking about the days I was carrying a beeper and that thing would go off when you're covering for 24/7, and all of a sudden you got a 3 a.m. call, you got to go in and, you can't remote into this thing. You got to go literally physically to the office and get into the data center and open up and reboot the servers or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I think anybody who's been doing Citrix work for a long time has at some point had some script that would kick in if the Citrix print queue or print driver or print service went down, or the Windows print service, or both. If it saw it go down, it would turn it back on in hopes that would fix things. And sometimes it did. But sometimes, like Chris said, you had to just get in the car and head over. I remember sitting in my driveway on like a Palm Pilot, remoting into a server just to get the print service going at 3 o'clock in the morning one time. Just totally floored that it worked, but it took me probably 15 minutes to remote in. I had young kids at the time, and I was afraid to go in the house and try to VPN, so I sat in the driveway and did it.
Nice.
All right, so option one, Seb, let's talk through how to get that going in a Citrix environment to use the UPD.
Before going too deep, second thing, never trust a user if he's saying it works on Windows, because Windows is definitely different from Linux and even from Mac OS. So please, if they're saying on Windows it works, ask again if there is a Mac OS user somewhere nearby and if it works there, because that's quite close to our solution. So let's start with our configuration. So we'll just make it.
But Seb, let's highlight something. So normal troubleshooting process in printing in any Citrix environment is, number one, does it work on Windows? Okay, yeah, it works fine over there. Okay, fine, thank you. Now let's validate somewhere else, like you just said. So I just kind of want to highlight that. The Windows part is important, but don't use that as the end-all, be-all to whether things are working correctly, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, go ahead.
Perfect, thank you. So going back to CUPS, because that's where we will use local printers. So CUPS is a printing system we are delivering by our operating system. So I will just make it from memory, so I will not look into my notes. So if you go on device and printers in our profile, you can define a couple of queues you want to reach. The local printer definition.
Oh, I think he got stuck. Chris, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm going to try to pick up where he was. Hopefully he can reconnect.
Well, let's do this real quick while he's gone. Let's define what CUPS is. CUPS is a printing technology, right, that was created by Apple. Is that right?
If I'm not mistaken, I'm looking here. Thank you, Wikipedia. Unix printing system is what the UPS stands for. So,
okay. So that means yes, because original Apple OSs were all based on Unix, and so that's where our story starts, is with the solving of the printing solution in Unix that got moved over. So common Unix printing system is what CUP stands for. And that's at some point gotten ported over to the Apple world.
Okay, apparently my internet dropped.
All right, no worries.
We were just talking about CUPS.
Yeah. So Seb, while you were gone, we were defining what CUPS means and where that came from.
Oh, perfect. So I don't know if you got the last sentences, so I will just restart where I ended up. So like I said, the configuration is made in my memory, so there is no notes I made on that. But we have our CUPS printing system. So if you create a new profile and go to devices, CUPS, and you will add a new printer. You don't have to care about the local printing definition driver set. Don't go in search if you HP LaserJet 2104 CDN PCL5, whatever printing definition is on the endpoint. It wouldn't usually. So just don't think about your printing endpoint at that moment. Just think about how the printer will receive the raw information about your print queue, because the printing let's say, acknowledgement will be done on the terminals or on the VDIs. So basically, if you create a new print on the endpoint, you go to CUPS and you just decide which kind of port you want to use. Do you want to use a network port? Do you want to use a local USB port or a serial port? And then by checking which kind of brand you want, just don't think about of HP, Xerox, or whatever. Just choose RAW as a general manufacturer and Q as the product itself.
So Seb, let me ask you about that real quick. So
sure.
I was absolutely shocked the first time I got into the IGEL operating system and looked at the printer drivers that are included. Are you saying that if I have an HP XYZ printer that I should not use that native print driver and I should just go with something else?
Yeah, exactly. So if, like we discussed at the beginning, we are now speaking about the mapping and printer in a session. And the real driver definition set is to be used on the terminal server side. That's exactly where we see a big advantage, because you have one profile called manufacturer raw and printer names Q, and you don't have to think anymore on the endpoint on your UMS on your profile side, which kind of endpoints you're looking at on the end user side. So just keep manufacturer raw and Q, because at the moment where the terminal server will send the printing job to the endpoint by using this mapping function, it will just get a kind of raw information. So nothing that would need to be reprocessed. Process was the term I was searching for. So the print processing process is be done on the VDI side. So the printer is just getting a raw file, more or less.
Yeah. So okay. So what you're saying is give it okay. So two things. One, you mentioned UMS. We haven't mentioned that at all, but the Universal Management System or server from IGEL is extremely important here, because that allows you to manage all your IGEL units and the print queues that you create on them. And if you're doing that generically from the UMS using something simple like the queue and using the raw drivers, makes everything very likely to work. I mean, your testing is going to prove that out or not, but it makes everything likely to work. And then you're handling the actual printing through the network print server or the VDA or both. And at that point, the IGEL unit is just getting what it gets and passes it on to the print device.
Exactly.
Right. One point I just want to add to that's in this white paper, if you're following along with it, it's option one, using the Citrix Universal Print Driver. And one of the things to keep in mind is, there's a list of printers out there. You can go and look at it and see which ones are on that list. But there are probably a number of devices that are not. So if your device does show up on that list, what we just talked about, sort of, that generic sort of raw queue configuration setting locally as far as the IGEL profile, you're basically saying you're going to send this into that remote session, and then the Citrix Universal Print Driver at that point is going to take over. And so that's kind of, all right, now we've got that as option one, and where do we go from there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I got to jump in and make one clarification here, not necessarily on what we're talking about here, but another thing that I see over and over again, and I'm talking, most Citrix admins that have been around a long time, they don't know the difference between client redirected printing, where what we're talking about here, where the print queue from the local device is showing up in your Citrix session and you're printing to that, versus session printing. Those can be mutually working together, but session printing is where you map that printer based on that print queue, based on whatever specific settings in the session. For example, if you're on the 3rd floor of the hospital versus the 4th floor of the hospital, that's session printing. But client redirected printing is where you're actually mapping through the Citrix ICA protocol down to the queue, local queue, using things like the Universal Print Driver. I just wanted to take a moment to point that out. It's something that I find that people are very confused by historically.
Absolutely. Good point. Definitely forgot to mention that. Yeah, thank you. So
okay,
regarding that raw queue, we are now getting to what Chris just mentioned, speaking about the driver mapping, because since we created now, let's say virtually spoken, printed locally on the IGEL endpoint, which is not useless, but it's not really helpful because it's a raw queue. You can have no kind of configuration you can do for your printer. We now need to define what we want to use on the terminal server VDI side. And that's where you are getting to the mapping in session part of the window. And there you have to choose a driver name. And that's where I'm seeing also a lot of trouble on our customer side. This driver definition, so the middle part of the window where you can choose from a list, is, at least in my opinion, might be totally wrong, so just get it with caution, but totally useless. Because I'm mostly using the second part of the window where you can define a custom driver name. This custom driver name has to match to 100%, and I mean 100%. If there is a space, a capital letter, minuscule letter, it has to match 100%. Because as soon as a device will get, let's say, mapped into the session, your print service will check, which kind of driver the client wants to use. And that's where, if you have a Citrix Universal Printing Driver and forgot to add a minus symbol somewhere, it will just fail because it will not find the driver that Windows is providing. So that's something you have to check on the terminal server side, on the print server, which kind of printer definition you have there. That's
so Seb, you're saying, so if I define a specific driver on the IGEL endpoint, then the driver name in the virtual desktop needs to 100% match that the syntax, and the driver name on the print server, if there is one, needs to 100% match. If not, it'll break down in the process. We may have lost him again. Chris, I'm having flashbacks to running into exactly this issue, and ended up using the one we talked about in option one.
Yeah, and like I said, we're breaking down this really good article on the community site for those listening. Mapping IGEL local printers to Citrix session white paper. You should be able to find it with any of those keywords. But yeah, this idea that right, you've got your on the Universal Print Driver, you've got 3 options that should be installed as far as printer drivers. The Universal Print Driver. We haven't really touched on this, but the HP LaserJet 2800 Series PS PostScript driver, and specifically required for Mac and Linux clients. And then there's this Citrix XPS Universal Printer. So those are the 3 things, and obviously the specific printer model, whatever it is, assuming it's supported by that, that's coming in and then getting that mapping and everything. So,
hey, so
Seb, are you back on?
Seb, you there?
Yeah.
So Seb, it looks like it looks like we've talked about number 1 and we've talked about, I think, number 3, which is where we're using the hardware specific drivers, or maybe we haven't. Which section remains? Which option?
We are still on number 1, to be honest.
Okay.
So we're still on number 1, and that's where it's getting messy, because you have just a couple of differences between method 1, method 2, and method 3, but the base set is mostly the same. So if you stay in that, let's say, virtually spoken, in that window where you defined your printer driver name that has to match Windows side. Now, when you click OK, the printer will be created locally. And then you are good to say, just last thing I want to mention is that you have to check that on the Citrix session part of your IGEL Citrix profile, the mapping function has to be enabled for printing. If you disable it there, it will fail. So just in case, you have 2 parts of the configuration where you need to cover that. So now you're able to start your session. The session will try to map your local printer that you just created before. And honestly, it will fail mostly if you didn't already had contact with macOS users or Linux users. For one simple reason, I must admit I cannot explain it to 100%. So we'll just try to explain how I got it when Googling a little bit around. You have, Citrix is giving a really nice KB article on how to set up macOS and Linux printing on their side. Mm-hmm. And you have to install a specific printer driver, which is not installed by default on Windows Server 2016, 2019 at least, which is the HP LaserJet 2800 PostScript, so PS at the end, if I remember right. And as soon as you install that one, disconnect your session, reconnect, and your printer should be mapped automatically.
Mm-hmm. So that said, you're pointing out that Citrix is encouraging you to use the HP driver in order to print to Mac and Linux, if not using the universal print driver?
Exactly. It doesn't relate to the universal printing driver. I know it sounds absolutely weird, but you have to install the HP LaserJet 2800, like I said, serious PS driver, whatever, to get any kind of local printers mapped into the session. Even if you're using the Xerox printer or a Brother printer, you have to install it on the Citrix side to get a local, let's say, Linux or macOS printer mapped into your session. I know it sounds really weird, but I had 10 to 20, let's say 10 to 15 users where it wasn't installed because they didn't have a macOS user in their company. And it failed, and it failed again. And after Googling around, it was, 5 or 4 years ago, I found that little hint on the Citrix KB side that you have to install the printing driver. And as soon as this one is installed, you're good.
So even if you're not using the driver for the print queue definition, you still need that software. Okay,
Exactly. I hope that no one will correct me in the XenTegra community in, let's say, in 1 hour, but that's definitely my knowledge base since, like I said, 5 years, something like that. And I would double check just to be sure during a second discussion if I'm still right in the KB article from Citrix, but I'm pretty sure that it is.
Well, if we find that somebody says that's not accurate, we'll clarify that in one of the future podcasts.
Please. Yeah, absolutely. I would be happy. Right. So now you have your driver, your HP Color, LaserJet, whatever printer driver installed on the terminal server side, and normally the printing process is now done on the terminal server side, and your printer from the local side is mapped into the session. So that's something that you see if you open the control panel and your printing and device option in your Windows control panel. You should now see a printer mapped from your client. So that's something that is between, how to call it, I don't know how to say it in English, to be honest, but between marks. So you have a, I will search for the term just after our call. But,
and that typically has the word local in it these days. It's been so long since I've had to do this. It's what's the key indicator? Local printer is what it shows up in the terminal server or VDA.
To be honest, I would have to double check at the moment. I don't have my Citrix environment started, but it was on and then your client name, if I remember right.
Yeah, and it might actually be, now that I'm thinking about it, I think that eventually turned into the word session printer or something. But yeah, it's noticeable. It's kind of if you look at it before and look at it after, you'll see a big difference, and it should jump out at you as to which one is coming from the session.
I would just double check on my side. I was just booting up my Citrix environment, and I can give you that that note in a second. But it's usually just showing your client name somewhere on your on the control panel side.
And the word might actually be client. Yeah, it's client, local, or session. I don't remember which one it is these days. I think it's been all three somewhere along the way.
I will check.
Okay.
It's booting up. But then, as soon as you have that that configuration, it was something on. But yeah, I will just double check in a second. As soon as you have that, you can print a test page and check if your printer is giving back what you expect. I mean, especially if you are having a color or a black and white printer, or sometimes also duplex printing. But then you're using the Citrix Universal Printing Driver, which is pretty handy and more easy to use and to deploy sometimes than the HP Universal Printing Driver, which is can get quite huge sometimes.
So if possible, always use number one, option one, and your troubleshooting starts by printing locally to like a local PDF from the IGEL unit to a print device, either through a network server or not. And then after that works and you do the work talked about here in option one, then you try to print a generic page, a test page, or a PDF or a notepad document through the Citrix session. And if all that works, you're probably good to go, right?
Exactly.
I will highlight real quick though here, if you're using the universal print driver, there is a conversion process where, if you're printing a document, it will probably not be noticeable if there's any kind of skewing of the document. However, if you're printing forms and you're not using the actual real driver for that print device, you might notice that your text on your checks or forms are now slightly off. So just be aware of that potential challenge. Hopefully it's not an issue, but it has, I've seen it in the past.
Yeah. And Chris found the article, so I would just check again, but I think it was really still the AP Color LaserJet 2080 series per script.
That's correct. So that one should be fine. I haven't seen anybody come back and say, actually, it's this, so that should be golden.
Yeah. So guys, we got about 10 minutes left. I think we're just through option one. You want to help us get through two and three here, Seb?
Sure. Last thing,
we were worried about having enough to talk about. Printing is a big topic, right?
It's huge. And just checked. So it's called your printer, and then on your client IP address, and then a dash. So if you map a printer, you should see HP LaserJet whatever on your client IP -4. Like an example. That's how I'm seeing it in my lab. If a printer is mapped into the session.
Yeah.
So, that was option number one. The option number two was the specific third-party universal printing driver. That's honestly more or less the same procedure like you would have on the configuration one. By just one simple change. Remember, I spoke about the use custom Windows driver name function, right? Where I said, please use the exact terminology that you have on your terminal server. So in that case, I guess it was Citrix Universal Printer. If you want to use something else, like the HP ones, no issue at all. You just have to change that printer driver name to what you need on the terminal server side by matching the window you are using. So let's speak about, HP. And it would be then HP Universal Printer Driver, whatever it might be called, and you can change it like you want. It's not more than that. You just have to tell the endpoint, hey, if you connect to Citrix or to RDP, which kind of printer driver should you ask for? And that's where you just have to change mostly the printer driver name itself on your profile.
Yes, and this is a great point here. I'm looking at following along. I've got my UMS and I've got a profile that I've built out for option two. In option two in the white paper, this is where you're looking at those third-party products that we talked about maybe earlier on. Tricerat, Uniprint, PrinterLogic, sort of that added value type scenario where they kind of take it to the next level and expand compatibility with some third-party solutions. That maybe the Citrix Universal Print Driver does not necessarily. And so in that particular case, what Seb was working for was talking about was the in the IGEL profile under mapping and sessions for that printer at the bottom, there's a use custom Windows driver name. And that's what we're now talking about.
Yeah. Thanks. Exactly.
Okay, so I think that sets us up well for option 3, which is a lot more detail or a lot larger detail based on the number of bullets here. Seb, do we have to start the conversation over, or is this just a tweak to the previous options?
It's just a tweak. I mean, we still speak about the universal printing in option 1 and option 2, right? So we might also have the situation where you cannot really rely on a universal printing, like if you're using a vendor that is not providing universal printing driver or is not compatible with the Citrix ones. There you could, if you want to, add some Citrix policies. And there, I admit I have to double check in the document because I don't have that all by hand. But you can use the option called use universal printing only if requested driver is unavailable. And then that's not the default, value. You can use then the auto-create client printers, which is usually not wanted in that specific case, to allow it for all client printers, because you can then get a little bit messy regarding your printer driver definition sorting. And that's where you can choose a function called auto-create all client printers. And that's where it gets a little bit more interesting. You can go back, like I said, virtually spoken, on your profile inside of your UMS and choose, when opening the CUPS driver again and moving to the mapping in sessions part of the window, go to the use Windows, custom Windows driver name, and there really use a specific one, which is then matching exactly the printer you are facing, like I said, a Xerox 2080, whatever. It makes sense as one specific case, because speaking about label printers like Zebra, which is at least in Europe quite often used for printing badges and so on, you would not be happy by using the universal printing driver, because it's not optimized sometimes for that specific device, for that specific kind of labels you want to use. And that's where it might sense to use really the specific driver set from the window that you installed on your terminal server.
Yeah, you're giving me flashbacks to 1999 talking about Zebra printers. I used to one of our use cases for Citrix was in a big warehouse, and learning how to get Zebra printers to work in a Citrix environment. I'm flashing back right now to that.
Yeah. So one comment on this. So in option 3, the article kind of talks about this, right? So let's assume the universal print driver is not going to work for this specific printer. Maybe it's a Xerox, maybe it's a Zebra, maybe it's a Brother printer, whatever. And you don't have a third-party vendor option either, like some of the ones that are part of the IGEL ecosystem. You're now required to get the device's specific driver, in this case, so the Brother printer or the Zebra printer driver, and that has to be installed in the Citrix environment in order to make this work. I think that's pretty accurate, Seb. Am I not mistaken on that?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for clarifying.
But that's your last resort. If you have to do that, you go get the specific driver and make sure all the things line up and test. And
that's where, depending on what you're connecting into, this is where, hey, is this going to cause a hang up on my server if it's a shared server OS or whatever. So that's obviously one of the cautions there. It does require a lot of maintenance. One of the thoughts, I had this on a Fed account where they were using something like Liquidware, for example, and they were able to, instead of having to, in the base image of the server, they were able to use Liquidware to kind of dynamically add a specific printer driver that they had and use that when the user logs in and kind of make it part of their profile. And that actually worked for this option 3. I don't have all the details, but that is something to consider if you have tools like Liquidware or some other profile manager kind of thing.
So, based on complexity, based on cost, based on something we haven't talked about at all, which is bandwidth consumption.
Yeah.
You really don't want to go to those options, but if you have to, and that's what it takes to print, and printing is vital to your organization, which people tell me all the time, we don't print. Okay, then let's go look. And next thing you know, you see they're printing 1,000 pages a day. Like, you still print. You don't realize you print, but you print. You don't print like you used to, but you still print. You can look towards third-party solutions either. And sometimes, and Seb, you probably know some of these concepts, you may end up taking multiple solutions like a printer logic plus some universal driver from somewhere else. And you bolt all that together. And at the end of the day, you've got a solution that prints.
Exactly. So we didn't spoke about third-party printing solutions like ThinPrint, etc. We're not speaking about follow-me printers. I mean, we just covered the upper part of the iceberg right now. So it's pretty tough. And we didn't even speak about the scanning function, which is also an absolutely different topic. And I would say my last resort would be, it's really my last line. If all that stuff didn't work, I would, but that's really the last line before just giving you a headshot is you try to use the native USB redirection, but really to try to do everything before even thinking about that one, because it doesn't give you any kind of optimization. And speaking about bandwidth, if you want to use USB direction for a printer and you push, I don't know, a 30 megabyte big Word document with screenshots in it, you will definitely kill your bandwidth in seconds.
Yeah. Well, I do want to highlight what you said there, Seb. So worst case scenario, you use USB pass through, not redirection, or maybe redirection or pass through the Citrix protocol. You install the drivers in your VDA or on your print server, and it's just throwing a big old fat print job down the pipe, just like it would if it was printing across a USB cable. Not optimal and not something you should lead with, but worst case scenario, that may be what you end up with.
Yeah, one thing too, if you happen to be accessing Citrix through a VPN connection and you are doing that last resort, kind of situation, if you're sending that print driver through, MTU size may be an issue as well. I know some VPNs, I dealt with this in a Fed account where it wasn't a printing situation, but we had to drop the MTU size down in order for certain components to work because I think it was related to the PCOIP protocol in that particular case. But with Citrix, just if you are in that situation, keep that in mind. Obviously, VPNs may not necessarily be needed in the Citrix with all the other technology available, but just all these little pieces kind of can play a part in some situations. So,
yeah, really good point.
So guys, I appreciate it. This has been really good, and I had to make fun of Doug next time I talked to him. He's a little worried we wouldn't have enough to talk about when it comes to printing for an hour, which I felt certain we would. I will do a quick plug for my company, XenTegra. Right, we can manage your printing in an IGEL environment as a service, and we found that that's probably the easiest way to get all this done and get you things like printer logic and get you the expertise that you need. But that's the whole point here is to help people understand a little more around the world of printing in a Citrix environment, and more specifically an IGEL Citrix environment, or just IGEL in general. Hopefully people found this valuable and we hit the mark. And Seb and Chris, I appreciate you guys joining and helping me out here.
Yeah, one more final plug. We are actually building out additional curriculum for IGEL Academy around the IGEL Ready program. And the very first, it's going to be called a showcase series. So if you go to IGEL.com, the Ready, you'll see like there's a showcase for partners. But they're actually building a series of courses around, things like it'll be printing, right? So it's not just, maybe all the nuts and bolts of all what we just discussed, but it's like, all right, IGEL, we're having part of a large ecosystem, and you'll hear information about how we work with, Tristerid or thin print or whatever, but that's being worked on. So more to come on that. So look forward to hopefully having that out here in the next quarter.
Yeah, between the community and what you guys are doing internally at IGEL, there's definitely tons of investment in your partners, your customers, your partners, your all the above members of the IGEL world. Really happy to see a company like IGEL investing in people.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you very much, and we'll pick a couple more topics for down the road and the next couple of weeks, and we'll get on here. We'll talk about it. We'll share it with the world, and hopefully get some positive feedback.
Cool.
Awesome. Always a pleasure, gentlemen.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much, guys.
Wish you all the best.
Take care.
Bye-bye.